Chapter 15: Hilo and Nearby Waterfalls. I felt so happy that my hearing was back to normal. It was as if my whole head could breathe again, and I did more research on Hilo, deciding what I wanted to see when I was there. All the while, thoughts of the upcoming solstice were rolling around in the back of my mind. On the solstice, I would start writing the sequel to my first book. But until then, it was time to finally get out of Pahoa and explore Hilo itself. And so, one Thursday morning, I hitchhiked over to the four-way intersection just south of Pahoa, beginning a 2-week stint of Hilo adventures. Thankfully, it didn't take long before someone responded to my outstretched thumb, pulling safely over to the shoulder. Less than an hour later, I was dropped off in the heart of Hilo, brimming with excitement over my impending explorations. I wandered around the bayfront, lined with various shops, cafes, and museums that had a remarkably clear view of the Hilo Bay ahead. And once again, I wondered why the land bordering the bay was left mostly unused, merely covered in green grass. The bus depot and a large gazebo were the only noticeable buildings to the north of Mamalahoa Highway as it skirted the edge of the city. I popped into a grocery store called Abundant Life and grabbed a veggie wrap before resuming my walk around town. And as I headed east along the strip, I looked out onto the bay to my left. Something about the green space intrigued me. Why was it so clear of buildings? It was beachfront property after all. Didn't developers like to use up such space as quickly as possible, usually ruining the view? It wouldn't be until I reached Coconut Island that I would finally learn the answer. Heading east, I passed towering banyan trees that were at least 3 times larger than any maple I'd ever seen before. I walked by Bayfront Park, crossed a bridge, and headed toward Liliuokalani Gardens, a beautifully maintained landmark that reminded me of an arboretum. But I didn't go inside. Something else caught my eye. A narrow footbridge ahead that spanned part of the bay, leading to a tiny island. Dotted with tall palms, the tiny island called out to me, and I crossed the narrow metal bridge to the other side, finding a wide grassy lawn in the center of the island just ahead, where dozens of people were practicing yoga together. A sidewalk led around the edge of the island, and I followed it to the right, passing a small bay and a stone tower at the far end. It appeared to be the ruins of an old building. Steps led up to the top, and people were using it as a diving platform. And way out in the distance, a faint rainbow stretched up out of the horizon and into the clouds. Eventually, I reached the other end of the tiny island, where there was a covered area for picnicking, and I pulled out my lunch, savoring the colorful veggie wrap as the waves crashed against the dark boulders ahead. As I ate, a team of 6 rowed across the bay in a long white craft, and beyond, I could easily see the far northern side of the bay, white mist suspended over the trees as if they were part of a dream. Once I'd finished eating, I followed the sidewalk to the west side of the island, where a few weathered plaques stood under some palms. One plaque explained that the open green area in the center of Coconut Island, along with most of Hilo Bayfront, had been devastated by a tsunami in April 1946, and then again in May 1960. Afterward, it became clear to the residents that tsunamis would continue to hit Hilo from time to time, and since the redevelopment of the old bayfront was seen as ultimately futile, they designated the entire area as recreational land. That's why Hilo was given the nickname City of Parks. I studied a black and white photo beside the text, depicting the nearby land inundated with water. Hopefully, I wouldn't be so unlucky as to witness such a disaster. But what about the seaside hotel to the east? The plaque explained that the hotel behind me had been designed with tsunami resilience in mind and contained reinforced concrete pillars starting on the ground floor. They also had thin walls, allowing any tsunami waves to pass through the ground floor of the hotels with little resistance. Unsurprisingly, the narrow footbridge to Coconut Island had been destroyed after nearly every tsunami. Only time would tell how long the current bridge would last. I looked up. The sun was getting low and the clouds were rolling in. I'd since realized how quickly the sun set on Hawaii and headed back over the footbridge. My couch surfing host, Rob, would be home soon, and perhaps we could make some dinner together. As I walked back, I couldn't help but be struck by the beauty of the clouds all around me, splashed in the reds and magentas of the Hawaiian sunset. Rob proved to be a generous and gracious host. Even better, he wanted help with his Mac Mini. I love helping out anyone who hosts me, and he was easy to talk to. He mentioned that he'd been a whistleblower in the Vietnam War, but he didn't seem to have much to say about it, other than his feeling that it was hell on earth. We got along well, and I was glad I could help him out with his computer. It was a good exchange, and he said he would be happy to have me back again sometime. Around this time, my dreams also grew more vivid, and my journal entries took on a new flavor. 2013, June 16th, Sunday. Last night, I had a dream that I was back in Wisconsin, my old life. I was standing in the driveway, wondering why I ever came back. When I thought of how I was in the wrong place again, I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I had made a mistake. I should have stayed in Hawaii longer. And then I woke up, and I was relieved to still be here. I still had a chance to do what I needed to do. Zahn still hadn't been found by Asha, and the waterfalls still hadn't been photographed. Reading between the lines, this entry reminds me of how I was excited to resolve the challenges that my characters had got themselves into in the first part of my new book. But to keep things fresh, I had to keep exploring. On that first exploration of the city, I also visited Rainbow Falls, so named because on sunny mornings around 10 a.m., rainbows tend to form in the mist around them. I didn't see a rainbow that day, but the falls were nonetheless a sight to behold. Cascading down off a plateau of lava rock about 24 meters above a large pool, the falls were framed beautifully by towering Moluccan albizia trees and verdant ferns. And below, layers of green moss found refuge in the mist that collected on the walls of lava rock on either side. Later, I would come to dislike the albizia trees, which are native to New Guinea, among other places, but in that moment, they struck me as beautiful. The falls are actually within Hilo city limits, and since they were just about level with the viewing area, it looked possible that I could reach the top of the falls without too much trouble. In fact, I could have sworn I saw a few people already up there. I made my way down a path that cut through dense rainforest, surprised to find that it had a railing, a rarity for paths on the island. A few minutes later, I came upon a rocky area, punctuated by shallow pools. Carefully stepping around these pools, I eventually reached a boulder just above the falls themselves, perching myself on a comfortable spot where I pulled out a raw fruit cookie that I'd bought earlier. The roar of the waterfall felt soothing, and I could easily see where the Wailuku River flowed east, making its way through a narrow channel toward the sea. And in that moment, I felt content and happy. The following week, I hitchhiked up to Hilo once more. Rob wanted to learn about his options for a website, and I was happy to answer his questions. While there, I visited the Panaeva Rainforest Zoo, which, according to its website, is the only natural tropical rainforest zoo in the USA. It also happens to have free admission, and I found it easy to spend hours there, enjoying the stunning red and green eclectus parrots, playful lemurs, camera-shy anteaters, an ancient tortoise that seemed to resent my very existence, a peacock that the staff felt would be happiest if it just roamed around the zoo freely, and a rare white Bengal tiger that humbled me with its beauty and grace. But without a doubt, the most impressive spot I visited that month was Akaka Falls. And because it was off of the beaten path, Rob offered to take me, saying that we could explore it together, and I gratefully accepted his offer. About 24 kilometers and 30 minutes later, We arrived at a parking lot beside a large sign where a single park employee stood. We paid the $1 fee per person and walked in, following the looping path past thick undergrowth and banyan trees, whose roots spidered over the rocks like otherworldly creatures. The forest canopy was thick above us, and I was grateful that the Parks Department had gone to such care to provide a path with actual stairs and railings. With so many ravines around, exploring the park without pathways could have been hazardous. We followed the path to the eastern edge of the loop to the lookout over Kahuna Falls. It fell over 90 meters, but from our angle, we could only see its edge. I could make out patches of white water racing down, but the thick forest made it difficult to get a clear view. Heading back west, the path led us beside the Kole Kole stream far below. Soon, the stream was completely obscured by the thick forest, but once we passed through a patch of banyan trees, the forest grew thinner. I noticed that a tree trunk ahead had some hearts and letters carved into it. Apparently, A plus D really wanted their love to be known, and I only wish that they hadn't injured a tree in the process. A couple minutes later, I at last saw the white streak of a narrow waterfall in the distance ahead. When we reached the observation point, I was stunned at the sheer immensity of the falls. A sign nearby explained that Akaka was a free-falling waterfall, plunging down over 130 meters as one continuous flow. And I looked up once more, watching how the water plummeted over the bare rock, almost straight down into a dark pool that was so far below us that it was difficult to get a clear view. Green and brown moss clung to life on the edge of the cliff face, growing thicker closer to the bottom, and I marveled at this exceptional place, the distant roar of the falls mixing with my thoughts of gratitude. Another sign nearby mentioned the native goby fish in Kole Kole stream, of which Akaka Falls was the most dramatic part. I learned that after maturing downstream, the Oopu goby must make its way back up the sheer cliff, using its pectoral fins and a suction disc above its belly to scale the 130-meter tall waterfall. Somehow, this 12-centimeter creature reaches the top to lay its eggs in the waters above the falls. Even more astounding, it's not the only species to do this. A native shrimp species performs the same feat. For comparison, I am about 1.76 meters tall. So to climb up something with the equivalent height ratio, I would have to climb up a sheer cliff over 1,900 meters high. Wow. After a few more photos, Rob and I headed back to his place to eat and relax. Reading about the goby's life made me tired just thinking about it, and I was happy to be human.